Hi everyone, my name is Katy Lipscomb, and I am a mixed media illustrator known for my fantasy, creatures, and animals. Today I am so excited to share some of my favorite tips and tricks using Derwent brand pencils, available now from Blick Art Materials. For this project today, I have a really fun array of supplies. I have hot press watercolor paper, a reference image, a pencil sharpener, artist tape, white gel pens, erasers, fine liners, a cup of water, brushes, and then the real star of the show are the Derwent Chromaflow and Derwent Inktense colored pencils. First, I'm going to be using this white artist tape to tape down my drawing so that it doesn't slide around while I'm working. To start off, I'm going to be using the Inktense colored pencils to create an initial sketch layer. I really love using the Inktense pencils for the initial sketch because they're watercolor pencils, which means that the sketch is going to melt away later on and we don't have to worry about the construction lines being visible when we're finished with the drawing. I like to start all of my drawings with basic shapes like circles, triangles, and cylinders. The idea here is really just to block out the different areas where the main shapes of the wolf are going to go. These are called lines of construction, and they're very helpful when initially sketching. I'm just staying very loose. I'm adding in a few fur details, but I don't want to get too specific just yet. Just basically blocking out the main shapes. And you'll notice I'm sketching very lightly. While the Inktense pencil will fade away after we add water, if we go too hard, we will still see some of those construction lines, which I want to avoid. And at this point, I am just constantly checking my reference image to make sure that all of the main shapes are lining up appropriately. It's always a bummer to finish a drawing and then to notice like an eye is off or an ear is off. It's better to check with reference lines early on to make sure all of those little details are just in the correct place. And that way when we put in all of the work later with the watercolor and the colored pencil, we'll at least know that the basic sketch is drawn right. And we really can just leave it at about that. It's just as long as everything's in the right place, it should look good later. Now that I've got the sketch done, I'm going to use the Inktense colored pencils to create a base layer of color. I'm going to start by adding large blocks of color without being too worried about getting nitpicky with the details. When we use the water, the Inktense pencils are going to melt into the paper like watercolor. It's more important just to get large swaths of tone down at this stage. And if you'll notice right now, I'm mostly laying down the color by just doing lots of hatching marks. This is an easy and consistent way to lay down the color without getting too nitpicky with those details. In areas that need to be a little bit darker, I can come back in with some perpendicular lines and crosshatch. And if you'll notice, I'm not always choosing colors that seem to be in the reference image. However, I am pulling out small areas where I can see a little bit of green or a little bit of blue, and I'm just playing up those areas so that there's more visual interest with the color. For instance, there's some reflective light under the chin that's showing up green on the reference, and I am adding that into the drawing because I think it's very visually interesting, and I want to amplify it a little bit. Once I've applied the color to the paper the way that I want it, I'm going to use water and a brush to melt the pencil pigment into the paper. It might seem weird to add water to a pencil drawing, but that's exactly what these Inktense pencils are made for. They're watercolor pencils, meaning that when you add water, it really will turn it into a watercolor painting. I do want to keep the application of color a little bit more controlled. If I just add water over the entire drawing, all of the colors will melt together in sort of a mishmashed way. Instead, I want to add the color and try to keep the directionality of the fur in mind. And this is why they call them Inktense pencils, even though the color is very light when you first are drawing. As soon as you add that water, those colors really pop. So you can see I added some dark blue, and that blue is really showing now that the water is applied. And you'll notice that the more water you apply, the more the pigments tend to pool together like traditional watercolors, and you can start to see some of those really cool traditional watercolor effects. Just be sure to use a heavyweight paper if you're using water so that you won't get any warping or buckling. I'm using a heavyweight Fabriano hot press watercolor block, which I highly recommend for this process. It's made to be used with lots of water, so warping is less of a concern, and the smooth surface of the hot press is the perfect surface for colored pencil, as it doesn't have too much texture. You'll notice those yellows and greens are actually really bright, but that's okay because again, we'll be going over this area with the Chromaflow pencils, and those yellows are going to shine through in the perfect way. And I'm just kind of letting this drawing fade off naturally, letting the pigment get lighter towards the base of the drawing rather than going all the way to the tape. It's okay to do it either way, I just think that this looks really nice to create a nice floating bust on the paper. To finish up, I just want to make sure that I did manage to hit all of those areas of dry pencil. I want to make sure that the drawing is completely blended together before moving on to the next stage. Now that the Inktense wash has dried, it's time for my favorite part. We're going to move on to using the Chromaflow colored pencils. These pencils are wonderful for so many different reasons. They blend really smoothly, hold a fine tip for sharp detail, and have rich, beautiful colors. In the beginning stages of the drawing, I'm going to be adding color very lightly in order to build up the different areas of the drawing. This is similar to the stage using the Inktense pencils in that I don't want to press too hard. I just want to gradually layer the pencils one layer after another. Right now I'm just building up these layers really lightly. Resist the temptation to go too heavy at this point because lots of layers are really key to a pencil drawing. If you add too much pigment too early on, you're going to grind down the tooth of the paper, which is going to make it very hard to apply more pencil. So you can see at this stage I'm using the pencils to really sculpt the different areas of shadow and light in the drawing. I'm using quite a few of the different Chromaflow colors, but not touching the entire 72 count. So once the colored pencils are layered the way that I like them, and there's lots of layers built up, I'm going to come back on top with a lighter shade of pencil and do something called burnishing. Burnishing is really cool because what you can do is push the previous layers of pencil lead together, which creates an ultra smooth finish. You don't have to burnish a pencil drawing, but I always prefer to because I think it makes the illustration look really crisp and clean. So I'm just taking a lighter pencil and I'm really pushing a bit harder. I'm pushing all of those layers together that we've built up over time. It's important in most areas to burnish with a lighter pencil because otherwise, if you burnish with a dark pencil, it can cover all of the previous layers of detail. Now that I've got the colored pencil layers just the way that I want them, I'm going to take one last step. I'm going to use a white Jelly Roll pen to accent some of the brightest areas of white in the drawing. This includes the whites of the eyes, certain details in the nose, and then I'm going to also highlight just a few strands of fur. Alright, I'm so excited. Now that I've finished this drawing, it's time for the cherry on top. What better way to finish off a drawing than with a signature? I'm going to be using the Derwent Winemaker pen for the final touch. Alright, and there you have it. I had an absolute blast creating this wolf with some of my favorite Derwent pencils. I think the Inktense and Chromaflow pencils work together perfectly to create an amazing combination. If you want to check out any of these pencils or anything else that I used in this demonstration, you can head over to Blick Art Materials to find out more. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see what you guys create with Chromaflow pencils.